Oh goodness, listening to this last recording number, I remember when I was a trainee social worker for about 7 months or something. I went to get the help of a chap called Bret. Oh, I don't know his other name. He was, is it called paraplegic? Completely paralysed apart from the use. He could move his arm, presumably his right arm, I can't remember now, and point on the board to what he wanted to say. He'd spell it out. Of course, he'd spell it out faster than I could read it, because I was not the most able of spellers, really. I went to him because I'd got a client with, I think, something crazy like 4 boys living in the most awful housing in Jaywick, Clacton. They had no running water in their huts that they lived in, and the hut walls streamed with water. I mean, it was damp, to say the least. It was awful accommodation she was in, coping on benefit, which was not good in those days. Has it ever been good, in fairness? But and I was a social worker, and I was a trainee, you see. I mean, and my goodness, I wanted to help, didn't I? God, yeah, I'd have moved heaven and earth. So I went to see this chap who was running a housing association for the distressed in nearby city of Colchester. I don't know, 15, 20 miles away. And, well, he's, as I say, he only had the use of his finger to point to the letters that he wanted to communicate. And he was running this voluntary association with his helper, full-time helper, devoted to him. I think they could only last doing it for a couple of years, young chaps, you know, and then they get someone else. You need to be a bloke, of course, to help lift him. He was no lightweight. I mean, utterly sedentary body, wasn't it? And, of course, he couldn't speak, this chap. He'd just foam at the mouth from time to time, and the helper would mop his mouth. I mean, it was all he could manage. But somehow he'd learned to use this keyboard, and he was the marvel of the locality, really, of those that knew of him. And he got my lady and her sons into some much better accommodation. Absolute blessing. But I don't know what his spiritual affiliation was. I just thought he was the most wonderful person I'd come across. I'm moved even more now to think of it. And he spent all this time helping others. And wow, what an incredible blessing. And okay, now, you know, if you take it in the run of the last recording, supposing at the end of life there's nothing, well, he's just done fantastic. And if there's anything just or kind or whatever you like to call it, or at the other extreme, most wonderful God, thank God he's got the most wonderful future now. Thank you, Heavenly Dad. Just a wonderful chap, wonderful dad, a wonderful example. I mean, you can't imagine, it just frightens you to death to think of coping with what he had to cope with. And he was this fantastic achievement, running this housing association for distressed people. I've forgotten why I was giving this example now, but I'm glad I've given it. And how wonderful to remember it. I mean, what's this? 50 years later, more than half a century later, and I remember this chap. God, dear. absolutely wonderful, really. Thank you, Heavenly Dad. And we had a note. Know what you value and devote yourself to it. It's so worthwhile. Just devote yourself to it as an utterly willing contributor. Want to help and be part of this. You know, this is, I know whom I have believed, and am persuaded that he is able to keep that which I've delivered unto him against that day. It's a Christian song. For I know whom I have believed, and am persuaded that he is able to keep that which I've delivered unto him against that day. So it goes on. You could look it up on YouTube, I suppose. You see, there's something that calls you, something that you find truly worthwhile, and that's where you should be. You've been touched by an angel. How wonderful, how blessed, how glorious. Love you, Heavenly Dad. Love you. Thank you, Dad. You see, this is not too coherent, this recording. But it's just that you can pick up something of the eternal. And that is your calling. Your calling in life, your calling in eternity, who you are, and what things are in some undescribable dimension. That's the very heart and soul, bedrock of who you are and what is. And it calls out your whole being. Thank you, Heavenly Dad.